Welcome back. In this video, we will discuss the offset function in Excel. At first glance, this function may look complex, but once you understand the logic, it becomes extremely useful, especially in financial models, dynamic reports, and dashboards. The offset function returns a reference to a range that is a specified number of rows and columns away from a starting point. The offset function helps you move from one cell to another cell based on the direction you give. Think of it like Google Maps direction. You start at one location, move two steps down, three steps to the right, and then select a certain area. That is how the offset function works. Let us understand the syntax for the offset function. Offset function requires five inputs, out of which the first three inputs are compulsory and last two inputs are optional. The first input, which is reference, is the starting point for the offset function. Rows is how many rows to move. Positive number means downward movement and negative means upward movement. Columns is how many columns to move. Positive is right and negative means left. Height is number of rows to return. This is an optional input. And width is the number of columns to return. This is also an optional input. Let us understand how we can use the offset function with the help of a couple of examples. In this table, we have the monthly sales and we are required to calculate the total sales for the last 6 months. When we get such problem statement, we can use the sum function and calculate the total sales for the last 6 months. But the problem is that let's say if we get the data for January 2026, which is 10,000, then this sum function will not work. So we will have to change the range in the formula, or we can make this range dynamic by using the offset function in Excel. Before using the offset function, let us understand how it works. So we will type is equal to offset, bracket open. The first input is reference. So we can start with the top of the column, which is the sales amount, cell C5, comma, the number of rows, let's say we enter 2, and columns 0, close the bracket and enter. So we get 8765 because we started with the sales amount and then entered 2, which is 2 rows down, which is 8765. If instead of 2 we make it 4 and enter, we get 8054 because now the cells have moved 4 rows down, which is 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we get 8054. In the third input, which is for the number of columns, if we enter 1, so we get a value 0. So because now Excel has moved 4 rows down and 1 column to the right, here we have no value, so it is giving 0. So let's say if I enter 5000 over here, I get the value 5000. So this is how offset works. Now let's understand the fourth and fifth arguments. So in the fourth argument, if I enter the height as 2 and width as 1 and enter, so I get 0 and 0 because now this has moved 4 rows to the down, 1 rows to the right, and then selecting 2 rows, which is 0 and 0. If I enter 1 and 2 over here, I get 1 and 2 in two different rows. In the column input, if I enter a 0 and enter, so now I get the value 8054 and 9181, which is in April and May 2025, the fourth and the fifth row. And instead of 1, if I enter 2 for the width and enter, so I get the value 8054, 9181, and 1 and 2, which is the value for this area because we have written 2 for the rows and 2 for the columns. This is how the offset function works. So we can combine the offset functions with other functions like sum, average, count, etc. to make it calculate the revenues for last 6 months or average revenues for last 6 months. So let us see how we can do that. I'll remove all this data and then go over here and type is equal to offset, bracket open, reference is still C5, comma. We want to calculate the revenues for last 6 months. Let me enter 6 over here, comma, columns is 0 because we don't want to move to the right, comma, height is 6 rows and width is 0. Sorry, width is 1. Close the bracket and enter. So we get the values from June to November. So instead of 6, if we enter 7 over here, now we get the revenues for last 6 months. And if I insert the sum function before the offset function and then close the bracket at the end and enter, so I get the revenues for the last 6 months, which is 18,363. But there is still a problem with this calculation, because if I enter the number for January 2026 for 10,000 and enter, so this value does not change. So what should we do now? So what we can do is we can count the total number of rows and then move backwards to calculate the revenues for the last 6 months. So instead of typing 7 over here, what we can do is we can type count A or count because it is a number. So we can use count or count A function and then select this range and select some extra cells so that if we enter the data, the formula takes care of that. Close the bracket, comma, and then enter. So what it is doing now is it is starting over here and then count A function counts the total number of rows, which is 13. So it moves 13 rows down and then calculates the sum for next six rows where we don't have any data. So what we have to do is we have to calculate the revenues from for last 6 months, which is August till August 2025 to January 2026. So instead of 6, we will type -6 so that the cells are counted August onwards, means -6 from the last data and enter. So now we get 25917. So if I check the data, I get 25917. And let me enter the data for February 2026 also over here. And I enter 5000 over here. So now the value is 28227. So if I calculate the data from September 2025 to February 2026, I get 28227. So now this is working fine. So it's a dynamic range. Again, if I enter the data for March 2026 and enter, let's say, 20,000 over here, so we get 45777, which is the sum for last 6 months. So this is how count function can help select dynamic ranges for calculating the revenues for last 6 months. In this case, let's see how we can use the offset function in a horizontal table. So it will work exactly in the similar way, but let's see how we can do this. So here we need to calculate the average sales for the last 6 months. So we'll type is equal to offset, bracket open, the starting number or starting cell is the sales amount, which is cell B25, comma, rows over here, we don't want to move down, so we'll type 0 in the rows. In columns, we'll type count A again or count function. So I'll type count A, bracket open, and then select the range a few cells after December 25 also, close the bracket for count A function, comma. The fourth input is the height, which is the number of rows we want it to capture. So here we'll type 1 and then comma, number of columns. So we want to calculate the average sales for last 6 months. So we'll type -6 over here, close the bracket, enter. So here we get the revenues for last 6 months from July to December. And now we will insert the average function before the offset function. So we'll type average, bracket open, within brackets we have the offset function, and then close the bracket for the average function and enter. So we get the revenue or average revenue 3145. So let me calculate that. So it is 3146. So we're able to do this. Again, now if I enter 10,000 over here for January, so this is dynamic, so it becomes 4404. And from August to January, if I calculate the average, it comes to 4405 rounded off. So this is working fine. This is how we can create dynamic ranges by using the offset.